The war on drugs now. Federal drug enforcement agents depend on confidential informants to make their cases. People who work undercover and get paid only if the drugs are seized and the bad guys go to jail. Now, you don't often get to meet a confidential informant, an undercover agent, but you're about to meet two of them.
At the body mic. You need infrared film, Freddie?
Don't bother with the cell phone. I'll take that on my gun.
Okay.
Fred Vallis and Dan Hanks are getting ready to go to work. They are confidential informants who work undercover busting drug dealers. Fred calls the way he dresses his uniform, his act, and they've acted lots of parts. Like the time they told a cocaine dealer they were the road managers for the Moody Blues.
Nights in white satin.
He thought we were like drug dealers to the stars, and he says, well, what's your connection with the band? And we said, oh, us? We're the road managers to the Moody Blues. Unbeknownst to us, the Moody Blues were playing
in town now.
Undaunted, Fred and Dan took their problem to the real manager of the Moody Blues.
He says, no problem. You just pull your limo up at the backstage tomorrow night, and you'll be the road managers for the Moody Blues.
They say the band treated them like family. The drug dealer was completely convinced.
So we introduced him to the DEA agent, who's supposedly this guy that runs a company called B&A Import and Export. B&A, by the way, was a company they actually set up, and it stood for Buy and Arrest. And the guy sells the DEA agent the 2 kilos and immediately gets arrested.
Fred and Dan say the drug dealer never did figure out he'd been set up. Perhaps because Dan and Fred have worked in the world of rock and roll, witnessed the gold records on their wall, gifts from grateful rock stars.
These are all Starship. This is the Earth, Starship Earth.
Now, if you're wondering why they are talking on television, Dan and Fred are writing a book called Rollover Inside the DEA, and a Hollywood production company has purchased an option on it for a TV series. But that's not why they still work undercover and still bust drug dealers. This is why.
If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
Dan and Fred are definitely part of the solution. And sometimes they leave just like that. They're dramatic, but they're effective.
That's a book I'd like to read when it comes out.
The guy in the Moody Blues case that was busted, it's a funny story. He calls them up afterwards and says, hey, that guy was a narc. And they said, what? You know, and Fred says, you must need some money for your attorney. You got anything else to sell? And the guy says, yeah, they set him up with another agent, and 5 more pounds of cocaine are taken off the street. Or as Danny put it, they should have arrested that guy for felony stupidity.
Yeah, we'll go back to it, though. What we'll do is we'll just tell you a little bit about what's going on. We worked for the DEA undercover for about 10 years and on and off. And through the course of that, we've become extremely familiar with the inner workings of the DEA. And the DEA is, at best, a...
Ineffectual.
Ineffectual is a good word. They're,
The structure is set up so they're divided in, just like all government agencies, into regions and zones and that sort of thing. But unfortunately what's happened is they've become more like a sales organization that competes for points. And as a result is, since we're freelancers, we don't go in any particular zone or region like a salesman would go. We go to all the zones and all the regions. And so let's take an example. If we were to go to San Francisco and start developing a case that eventually led to a drug dealer in San Diego. Unless we can get that drug dealer in San Diego to come to San Francisco, we'll get virtually no help from the DEA. They will ignore it because the San Francisco office will say, well, hold a minute. If we make this bust in San Diego or pass a case out to San Diego is going to get the credit. So we'd rather not make the bust than let San Diego get the credit.
what you have here is you have basically the same situation that you have a football league or a baseball team.
Good analogy.
Where they trade off star players. We were signed up at one time with San Francisco, as outside operatives, and we came up with
confidential informants.
confidential informants on the
We're
CI
rats, is what
program.
it is it real realistic. We're pretty much paid rats.
Paid rats is
Yeah,
good.
we don't
I like
mind
that.
saying that. We're snitches. We get paid for that. That's what we do.
So we come into San Francisco with the deal that we have 100 kilos of cocaine coming in over the Mexican border into Southern California. Our control agent in San Francisco tells us, well, can you get them to bring it up here? We said, what are you, crazy? We can't bring it up here. Give us a new agent down in San Diego. We'll work the case down there. What you have is that each district, each zone of the DEA, has a sales chart on the wall with a little graph, just like any sales organization. Promotions within the DEA are made on a basis of production, being the amount of drugs seized and the amount of arrests made, versus cost, how much it cost them to run the investigation and how much they had to pay their informants. Because of that, the DEA doesn't like to pass off a star informant or a star agent to another district for two reasons. Number one, the other district would get credited for the 100-kilo bust, which would put their sales chart way up. Number two,
You can also sit them down.
their sales chart, meaning the San Francisco sales chart, would not reflect the production, and the promotions that come down the pike would go to the San Diego office as opposed to theirs. For this reason, the DEA winds up like a dragon. You can tiptoe past it as a drug dealer all the time, and as long as you don't grab it by the tail and shake it, the dragon won't awake.
It's very rare that when you hear major busts on television that happen, the ones you hear of that happen in Florida happen simply because of mathematical odds. They're only actually catching maybe 10% of what's coming through, maybe less, I don't know. But if you bring enough drugs into the country, once in a while you're going to have one of the importers, smugglers get caught. As for the rest of the country, you very rarely hear of a major bust, and when it does happen, it happens because of an amateur getting into the business usually. Of course, the John DeLorean case is famous, but there's a lot of other cases where people were real estate people, bankers, lawyers, people that had a means of laundering money, and someone approached them and said, hey, you know, you got $10,000, how'd you like to turn it into $100,000 overnight? And that's essentially what happens. You have amateur drug dealers, mainly cocaine, because it's so compact and portable and worth so much for the pound. In fact, it's worth more on the market now than gold is. It's hard to believe that something by weight is worth more than gold, but it is. And it's cheap now. It's worth less now than it was, say, 5-6 years ago. The DEA, on a reward program, pays for bodies seized, cocaine seized. They also pay for what they call reversals. If you know a large investor that's going to buy cocaine and use it for resale, and you can get that person to approach you to buy the cocaine, and the money is seized, the informant usually gets 10% up to a set level depending on the office. Other problems that we've run into, besides the fact that we can't make a case and have it transferred to another office, unless we go to that office directly, and even that office is suspicious. I think they're being set up sometimes. Is that when we go to actually make a buy, if the buy is done like at the end of the fiscal quarter, the fiscal year, you can't make it. They won't have the money. Or if you do have the money, they can't take it any place other than the one meeting place. So if the drug dealer is knowledgeable of the DEA's operation methods, he can say at the last minute, I've decided instead of meeting at the Holiday Inn, let's meet at the Quality Inn across the street. Even if it's just across the street, they can't take that money to a different location other than one that was signed out for. And they lose the deal, because the guy's going to know they're the man and not make the buy.
What you have here is a basic problem. It's not the street-level soldier of the DEA, the DEA street detective or agent. You have a problem with policies set by the higher-ups.
Who've never seen any drugs, by the way, unless it's been on TV.
Right, who for the most of the time, they don't have any experience out on the streets. If you want to be a successful drug dealer, you only have to follow a few simple rules. Number one, always do your deals late at night on a weekend. The DEA agents don't work those times, or with rare exceptions they do. Number two, you work near the end of the fiscal year. The DEA has trouble raising what we call a flash roll, which is money that's not going to be spent for drugs, but it's money that the agents are going to show the drug dealer in order to prove that they have the capability of putting up this kind of cash in order to make a buy. $100, $200, $300, $500,000. Number three, you change your plans at the end, very close to the end or the consummation of the deal, which means exactly what Dan was saying. The deal is supposed to go down in room 211 of the Holiday Inn. 5 to 10 minutes before that, all the dealer has to do is say, we changed our mind, we're going to do it in the parking lot of Safeway 4 blocks away. When a DEA agent signs this money out, it's all marked by means of Xerox copying each bill. And it's signed out to a specific agent to go from the DEA office to a specific place and back to their office. The DEA agents cannot move that money from the route which they have signed it out for. So if you're a drug dealer and you change your plans like that, the DEA can't move, and you know that if they cannot move the money from the original site to a new site to cancel the deal, you've got the cops.
You know, Fred was mentioning that they very rarely work on weekends. The one case that I can remember where they worked on the weekends is in Baltimore. And the only reason all the agents showed up is the meet was going to take place in a bar that had a big screen TV and the football game was on.
Right, so they all got to sit around and watch the football game.
We decided to call off the meet, and they said, no, let's wait another 2 hours for them, because they knew they were on the clock getting paid, and the football game was going to be over for another couple hours. So the government paid for 2-3 hours of 6 or 7 DEA agents to sit and watch National League football. But that's virtually the only case I can ever remember where we could get them to work on the weekend.
That's correct. That's correct. We could go on and on about the DEA, and part of what we do is talk about the DEA and how to improve it and what the basic command problems are. The other thing that we also talk about is in America you can't get rich slow, you can only get rich quick. And sometimes the most harebrained of ideas are what pays off.
Poor quick.
You can also get poor quick.
We had a pretty harebrained idea a couple of months ago. Actually, this is about a year ago now. We're sitting around broke, waiting for, actually we're waiting for a DEA case to develop that we've been working on for a couple of months, and they put off the buy for a couple of weeks simply because of the fiscal year, and couldn't get the money for a couple of weeks. So we decided, well, we're not doing anything. We're sitting around Fred's house. Why don't we write a book about what we've done?
Well, back up. Originally, we had done some technical advisor work for Michael Mann on Miami Vice, and
Band of the Hand
and Band of the Hand and several other films. Since we knew the people in the production, we had sat down many times over lunch and talked to them and told them war stories. This happened or that happened. And subsequently, 6 or 7 months later, we'd see the story we had told on TV. So when Dan mentioned writing this book, we said, well, wait a minute. Every time we tell somebody about this stuff, we wind up seeing it on TV and we don't get any money for it. So Dan said, let's write a book. So we said, okay, we're not doing anything, let's write a book. And we sat down. And in 2 weeks, we banged out approximately 100 pages of a first draft manuscript. And Dan wrote a letter to the William Morris Agency in New York City.
That's right. We didn't even send them the book. We just sent them a letter.
No, we sent them a letter.
And we sent them this letter. In fact, I got to dig it out because I got to figure out whatever was in this letter that could hook them that quick. It's a 2-page letter. We sent it on a Friday. Monday afternoon, Pam Bernstein of the literary department of William Morris calls us up and asks if we'd like to come to New York and bring a copy of the manuscript and discuss a deal. So we showed up there on a Wednesday, I believe, and the next day we were signed as being represented by William Morris within, what, 6-8 weeks.
Right, well, originally the literary department had signed us because they had planned to publish it as a book.
Yes.
However, approximately 6 weeks later, having heard nothing, we thought it had gone down the pike. 6 weeks later, we get a call from Pam Bernstein again, could we come to New York? There were some people from New World Television, New World Pictures at that time,
Yeah, it was New World Pictures.
that were interested in developing it as a major motion picture. And needless to say, we were ecstatic, so we jumped in the car and drove back up to New York.
Then we flew that time. Well, what's not important, we were in New York. And as it turned out, that deal for the major motion picture eventually developed into the possibility of New World making it into a TV series and marketing it to one of the networks or one of the independent distributors. Eventually, over the next 7 or 8 months, it was developed into a TV series called, tentatively, Vermin and Pestilence. And Vince Patrick was brought in, who you might remember wrote the screenplay, the book, and directed the film Pope of Greenwich Village. And he took our material and turned it into the initial script, which is now being worked on as the pilot for the new TV series, Vermin and Pestilence, which is supposed to air on ABC at this time, but you never know what's going to happen.
We think there's a market on the speaking tour with the college sector, discussing how to get a manuscript started, the steps to go about
If
getting
you're
it done.
like us.
And it takes a great deal of luck. You have to have the right combination at the right time. But we're now really aware of the steps and the intricacies and the workings of the entertainment business as to how things progress from initial first draft manuscript through the rewrites into selling it to producers, and the producers going to the network, receiving the network development commitment, receiving the go-ahead for production, and right into the beginnings of production. And I think young writers would be interested in knowing that two schmoes like us can go out and on a first crack. We've never wrote anything before besides bad checks.
2.5 schmoes. I think the actual weight of a schmo is probably about, what, 150 pounds for the
Yes, I think schmo level is 150
Yeah.
pounds.
So we may even have 3 schmoes here.
Right. But you can take two regular guys who never wrote anything before and get lucky and go through. And I think writers need to know that, because there are a tremendous amount of good writers out there who just don't know how to go about marketing their product. I wrote newspaper articles and magazine articles for years and could never get one published. And all of a sudden,
They want to see
there's
everything.
no problem. They want to see everything. Anything we write or anything we think of. We were in the office of Len Rosenberg from William Morris, who's our theatrical agent and also vice president of William Morris Agency, and discussed a new concept with him just 2 days ago, and now he's again setting us up with writers to go ahead. He loves the idea.
We'd like to tell you some of the stories, but unfortunately, after talking to our agent, we can't do that.